he picked almost every single piece except the big one, which I had kind of suggested, like, hey, do you mind if I, put in one of these things that I'm working on? He was very open to that. But he himself gravitated to the pieces that had content and that don't fit into any of these, which is a really funny thing because it was one of these like, wow, this show, Kirk Hopper, is a great opportunity.
Right.
On the other hand, it's exactly the work that like I normally don't show.
Right.
But I'm open. I think that's the whole thing about, all of this is collaborative. He had a vision for that show. I like those works. They were generated as a response to, I had another piece with him in a show at UTD in January that had a different piece but similar in idea. I had a whole set of pieces that I had worked throughout the last 6 or 8 months that did have some content, and that was specifically kind of about exchanges between the U.S. and Mexico, and so I was making more referential. They're somewhat abstract, but they're referential in terms of the color. They sort of have that like Mexican blanket color and striation. Bandanas, but they were really mostly just bandanas and these kind of like Baja blankets.
Right.
And the idea behind them has to do with migrants and migration. So it is kind of a more political content.
Sure.
They're not fully realized in my mind, so I had let them go sort of reluctantly because I think, he was very excited about them and eager to show them, but they're sort of just in a process right now. But the idea was, using collage, they're kind of making references. So for me, the blanket's literally something I did grow up with when I was a kid. We did move back and forth from Texas and the United States quite a bit. My parents were young hippies. We always had those blankets in our car. And the bandana is also one of these kind of iconic, like it's literally what you take when you run away from home, but it's sort of this thing that's like, it serves this kind of very utilitarian function. So those two things meant so much to me. And so was trying to make some work that had to do with moving back and forth. One's called Black Market, and it is somewhat about this, contraband kind of movement back and forth, and it's in like a vortex, sort of pinwheel shape. And then the other piece in there are these kind of strange blanket forms, and then I added they're like little dots that come from the subway stops in Mexico, like when you those maps.
Yeah.
But I took out the names of the subways, but it's just about transiting and moving back and forth. So they're very personal. They're kind of more back to this idea of a more narrative type of thing, and so there were kind of unusual pieces in there.
So you know what's going to happen. Folks are going to fall in love with those. And they're going to, there's going to be this huge demand for something that you just like,
There's only 2 of them.
Right, exactly. And you're like, wait, what was I thinking when I did, like, how would this become, just kind of turn your life upside down, like, oh.
Yeah, art does that, doesn't it?
Right. And so you're currently studying at UTD?
I'm a glutton for punishment. I'm in the...
Aren't we all?
Yes. I'm in the PhD program, and I've been in it for a long time because I have a now 11-year-old.
Right.
And, doing the work in the studio and then teaching and all that kind of stuff. And so I'm almost done. I've got to get ready for my exams and then write my dissertation. But I'm hoping that puts me out about maybe 2 or 3 years.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that program, that is the aesthetic studies. Tell me about that program, because I had another guest on, Liz Trosper.
Yeah.
And Liz, if I remember her story right, she had actually started, studying aesthetic studies at UTD, and then had migrated over to like the MFA, and
Right.
She does assemblage, on flatbed scanners and things.
Yeah.
And it's really interesting work. But what attracted you to being a glutton for punishment? And having already had your MFA, what attracted you to that program, and what it was going to add to who you are?
Well, let me put it this way. When I started, and what it meant to me when I started and what it means to me now are two different things. Because for me, it went on so long. So when I started, I was, had been teaching for a few years at Richland College, and I wasn't teaching in studio. I was teaching more like art appreciation, humanities and stuff. And I started the PhD because I really like writing, and there are certain things that I like to do, and I thought that it would maybe be a useful degree to have to be able to do more work, like project work, like for museums and research, and because I could see that, teaching at the community college is a lot more of a course load than like at university. So I was teaching 5, 6, 7 classes sometimes. And so in my mind, I thought, I could do research, I could write, I could do other things, maybe try to land a university job, etc. And over the course of time, it has meant something different, because I've realized I really don't want to teach anymore. I love teaching, but it's not. I've gone on now 15 years, and I have more urgency about making my work. But I do like writing. I've gotten more into, and I did end up doing some research for the Amon Carter, which was an amazing experience, and
Sure.
I want to be able to do more of that. So to be honest, the real honest answer to that question is that maybe today I wouldn't have started a program like that.
Right.
But I started it for what I thought were pragmatic reasons, and now what it represents to me is probably, hopefully, a book that I can get out of it, because I feel like I put so much work and thought into some things that I'd like to at some point do that, write more. And it's I don't feel like it has to be take me to another job, but I do want to get something out of it in terms of the time that I've put in. It's a really good program. I think it's gotten better over the years. I think that it's become stronger, which is a good thing.
Right.
At least it didn't go the other way, right? But it has its kinks that it needs to work out too, because it's a multidisciplinary program, and I don't think it's always been structured in the best way to help students like me who are older maybe and working and doing a lot of things. The best thing I've gotten out of it is really all the relationships, and I think that's, I don't know for Liz if that's true or not, but like just, the people you meet with, the people you work with, the energy there. I've had opportunities to show work there. I've gotten some, kind of research gigs out of it. Like, it's a very supportive community. And I think it's an important part of Dallas. And so somehow it makes sense for me to have, gone through that.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, are you at liberty to talk about dissertation ideas? Yeah.
I have an interest in NAFTA era artists from Mexico. Wow. It's an emerging era, I think, that as far as research goes, not a ton has been done in terms of art. And so there are ancillary aspects of it, which is, having to deal with the art market, relationships between the U.S. and Mexico, but also just a whole set of artists that are using non-conventional tactics to deal with the political climate. And in particular, I'm really interested in bringing in an element of architecture, and it's kind of a way for me to connect back to Mexico City, because I mean, NAFTA's, affecting both countries, and so a lot of people focused on the border region.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm actually wanting to write about artists in Mexico City and artists who used the city as the sort of material for their work.
Right.
So there's since it's a multidisciplinary
Sure.
program at UTD, the aspect that I'm bringing into it is thinking about architecture. So I'd like to write a chapter, for example, on stadiums, stadium architecture, and all these artists who have thought about the stadium and conceptually, but also have done work in the stadiums, plazas, public spaces,
Sure.
Spaces of spectacle, and so there's kind of different components to that.
Really interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think I read that your grandfather also wrote about.
Yeah, he was a writer.
Right. And,
Yeah.
he correct me, maybe you can tell the story about the book that was eventually published of his newspaper articles over the time he spent with Diego Rivera.
Yeah. So my grandfather, he was a journalist. He was also a poet, and he even wrote science fiction. He had some really cool jobs. He worked for a while writing stories for Walt Disney, but
Wow.
they were kind of more. There was a magazine called Apopeya, which was like one of these sort of like adventure based on history kind of comic books for kids. So he wrote. He did all kinds of writing, and he really lived in that sort of epicenter of the 50s, the golden era. In Mexico City, and it was a big town, but it's like here, it's a small town.
Right.
Eventually, everybody knows each other, and he was politically, left socialist,
Right.
and of course, as a journalist, so he made friends with that circle of artists, and he was younger than Diego Rivera, and at the point that he interviewed Diego Rivera, he was much older, and I think it was like just a couple of years before he died. So at that point, Diego was also very generous with his time.
Right.
And so they hit upon this idea of getting together every Sunday. And so my grandfather would go out to his studio, and he interviewed him every Sunday for a year. And it's a really it was published a while back ago in Spanish, but it had not been published in English.
Right.
And so really it's kind of a trove of great things, because Diego, sometimes he's very serious and he's saying like really profound things, and then other times he's being bombastic and saying a lot
Right.
of over the top stuff, and so my grandfather's half brother, my uncle, who is also an artist and a writer, and he lived in New Mexico.
There's a theme here.
Yeah.
That you
We're-
guys really the apples are not falling far
No,
from the
they're
trees
not.
here, right?
They're very, yeah, exactly. We all have the same sort of mental makeup. But he took those and translated them into English, and he died last year. So this is what would you say, posthumous book. But we're helping, with the book launch. We're going to do it at Wild Detectives and just make a party out of it. And I think it's a really fun read. I like reading artists' bios. I mean,
Sure.
What do you call it? Autobiographies.
Yeah.
Or, they're pretty strange and fun usually. And years ago, I remember reading Peggy Guggenheim's Out of This Century, and it's a kind of a page turner. You're like,
Right.
what? Really? You slept with him? Like, I mean, I don't know that people who are not artists would find it that interesting, but Diego is a great character.
Oh,
and
yeah.
And it's a very approachable read. It's not art historical. It's just literally like, two guys who you can tell enjoy each other's company, chatting.
So is the book? Does it just kind of follow each of the conversations, or is it kind of has he taken, topics and put them back together?
No, they're almost, I think, just kind of chronological, which is the fun part of it, because you pick up threads and then